Meg Halford, Boulder County Wildfire Partners.
Hi, and I'm Vicki Reinold, also with Wildfire Partners. I'm the grants administrator. All right, so thank you everyone for being here and just showing up with your name and place of where you work. That's awesome to get us started. And we will just go over this agenda quickly. We'll start with an introduction, a little bit more into why we're doing this today. Then we'll go over some quick tips. These are just a few pointers, both broad in terms of grant writing, and then followed up with some real specific for the SFMG. Then we'll spend the majority of the time really looking at how to develop your budgets and strong budget narratives for the SFMG grant proposal. Then we'll just kind of take it sort of box by box and go over those key application narratives and what the expectations are and how to kind of show your best on those questions. We'll follow it up with some Q&A at the end. With that being said, though, if you have questions throughout the training, just go ahead and use the raise hand button to ask your questions, and we'll try to get to as much as we can as we move through it. So with that, I will turn it over to Meg.
Okay, thanks, Vicki. And again, just to reiterate, I know that several of you folks came to our larger grant workshop that we partnered with Colorado State Forest Service and DNR a year ago in April. So this is kind of a mini version of it. So you're going to hear a lot of repeated themes, a lot of repeated recommendations, and we're also going to repeat a lot of we're going to say read your guidelines 500,000 times and do the math ahead of time a lot, and that is intended there is an intention to that. So again, as I said at the beginning, this is not to say that you're not already doing some of these things and you may be going, oh, I'm great, I do all this, and that's fantastic, and this might just be a little review for you. But for folks who are newer to grant writing, this is really to help you be successful. We want to give you funding. We want to fund your project. So we're here to help you be successful. On that, why we're doing it. So we're still receiving similar reviewer feedback on tendencies for lower scored applications. And so what we do is we collect that feedback for each cycle, and then we kind of go, okay, where are we seeing those same tendencies over and over across all cycles, and how can we address those to help applicants to improve on that? We're common missing elements in the application narratives. Still seeing budget mistakes and narrative structure, right? Where sometimes those narratives are kind of rambling on or having either too much explanation, too many words, right? Or being too vague. So not clear and concise and telling a clear story. So how can we help you narrow that down? Again, also knowing that you didn't come into this profession as grant writers. None of us did. So this is like an extra curricular activity, but a critical activity in order for you to get your work done. So obviously, too, it's obvious when we're reviewing grant applications that the applicants are not reviewing and using the grant guidelines. If you're not familiar with our grant guidelines, Vicki and I have spent a great amount of time on making a very comprehensive guideline, box by box, giving specific examples of what should be in those boxes. And we review those yearly, right, to make sure that they're up to date. We edit as we need. Those are for you. And I know it may seem wieldy, but at least read them at least once, because if you go to box, hey, project sustainability, and we give you an explanation of what should be in there, what we're looking for, that's just going to make it easier for you. And then for folks who attended the grant workshop a year ago, we gave you a grant workbook or a notebook with successful grant application examples, and we're happy to share that out to new folks on here. use those. Those are high scored grant applications. None of them are within Colorado. We wanted to keep it, so it's wasn't here. Nobody knew anybody, but those are very high scored grant applications for a reason, right? They're clear, they're concise, and complete. So I just highly encourage you to go back to that notebook. Go ahead. Believe it or not, our little SFMG grant program has become more competitive since it first launched in 2023. Even though the grant is specific to Boulder County, $2 million isn't a whole lot over 2 cycles, and we won't go into this now. We are going to consolidate down to 1 cycle starting in 2027. Same budget amount, but it's still, that's if you get you got 10 applicants trying to look for match money. 2 million is not a lot, right? So our grant has become quite competitive. In past cycles, we've been lenient in scoring and awarding funds. This is not to say that we have not funded grant applications. We have a few that we have not pushed through to recommend for funding. But in the past, because of the grant amounts and because I do those pre-application site visits, it kind of gives you all a leg up because I get to see, that project. So I know in my mind and with the selection committee, well, this is a good project. They're just not depicting it in the grant application. So even if a grant application had scored low, we would talk about it and we would calibrate and go, okay, yeah, they were missing a lot here and they made a mistake here, but we know it's a good project. We're going to push it forward. We're going to have to move from that process moving forward. As I said, small annual budget with larger grant funding requests. We may get 3 or 4 grant applications in 1 cycle, which is not a whole lot. If you look at Colorado State Forest Service, who gets over 100 furworm grant applications, but small budget and larger grant requests, right? So if we get a grant request for $800,000 and we have other grants and we go over that budget, we're going to have to wait and scale the projects, the applications. Go ahead. So again, now we're going to integrate a weighted and scalable approach moving forward. And that doesn't mean that, we still want to fund every project that we get, as long as we know that it's a good project and it's well developed. But we will have to be a lot more critical in if there's a lot of mistakes or we're missing a lot of elements that's not telling the clear story of that grant project, right? And also too, it is real easy to tell when a grant application has been written in the 11th hour. It's missing a lot, and those are the ones who have not been funded in the past. So that's why we're here today, just to kind of, again, we think you guys have some all fantastic projects, but grant writing and grant applications is a critical part of your job, and so we're just trying to help you make it easier to be successful.
Any questions about any of that so far? Are we ready to move on? Okay. All right, so I'm just going to go over a couple tips for writing a successful grant proposal, particularly for those of you who are new to grant writing, but it's always good to have these reminders, as Meg said. So, and if you were at the workshop last year, you've seen this specific graphic before, and I really like it because it shows how each step narrows your focus and sharpens your proposal. So you're starting with the broad foundations and then ending with targeted feedback from someone who's reviewing it for you. And this just helps you know that your submission is strong and also has the ability to be successful, that it's strategic. And this, it's going 1 through 6. But if you've written a grant proposal before and developed the project, it's not entirely chronological. So some things like developing the project, include creating a detailed budget. So again, the funnel is just looking at the level of detail that's going into the proposal at each step. So the first one is making sure you thoroughly understand the requirements. And, this is one of the things that we're going to say a lot. So review the eligibility criteria. That's the very first step. Make sure that the type of project you're developing falls into the eligibility criteria of the proposal or the program you're applying to. And you also want to be really clear on things like deadlines, submission guidelines, required maps or attachments, and the notification timelines. All of these play in, particularly because it's a matching grant program and you're looking for other funding. And you're probably well aware of this, but just making sure you're clear on all of those things, that your ducks are in a row as you're applying for multiple grants. And all of these things will impact your planning and writing process, and skimming or ignoring the requirements or guidelines can kind of disqualify you, or, before you even started the proposal or before it's even read. So just really paying attention to those guidelines. The next is developing a strong project plan. And as Meg said, we're going to go into a lot of detail with this later, but basically your project plan is the backbone of your proposal, and it will include clearly defined goals and objectives, a realistic timeline. With SFMG, you have 3 years, the expected outcomes, and a plan for sustainability. So having that strong plan shows that you're prepared, organized, and capable of delivering on what you propose. The next piece is using clear and concise language, and this is another one that we can't emphasize enough. So, Meg mentioned she does the site visits, and you may have gone through all the steps of developing a fantastic, fundable project, but if you aren't communicating it with clarity and simplicity, your message can get lost. So, as a reviewer, in the past of grant applications, if I have to read something 2 or 3 times to make sense of what the applicant is saying, it will get a lower score. So just be real sure that you're proofreading and have someone do that for you. The next, it's not really step, but the next piece is making sure that you have a detailed budget. And we'll spend a lot of time on this. I'll just say that you want to make sure that everything is clearly explained and justified as a necessity, and that a vague or very inflated budget can raise red flags for reviewers. So just make sure you've got that dialed in. Then you want to demonstrate the impact of your project. Funders invest in results. They want to know that your project will have tangible outcomes to benefit the community. So you want to be specific about the expected outcomes, how you'll get there, and how you'll measure success. And then finally, I've already said this several times, but get feedback. You could have a colleague, a mentor, even someone unfamiliar with the project to review your proposal. When you're working on this proposal, sometimes maybe for a year or more, you've seen it a million times. Fresh eyes can really help catch some mistakes, offer insights, and particularly if it's someone not real familiar with the project, it can help you improve your clarity. If they don't really understand what you're talking about, there may be someone on the review panel who doesn't either. So this has saved me so many times, and not just in writing grant proposals, but in all types of written communication. So you don't want to skip this step. Any questions on any of this? And again, we'll dive into a lot of it more deeply. All right. These are just the SFMG quick tips. A lot of what I said before was applicable to any proposal, but for the SFMG, I'll say it one more time, follow the guidelines, and Meg will go into details with this. You want to do your math first. Know your needs in advance, calculate line items, understand the difference between hard match, in-kind match, and also landowner match, and then make sure everything adds up. The next is engage the community, right? You want to do that early and often, starting with an informational meeting at the beginning of project planning and then throughout project development and implementation. And you all know this, and projects have the best outcomes when they're done with the community and not simply for the community. Another just kind of logistical piece is because of the word counts and character counts that are allotted for each box, it's best to start in a Word doc where you can monitor those things. And then, we have currently a fillable PDF, which maybe someday will become an online application, but it's much easier to do that sort of proofreading and character counts from a Word doc. The next thing is make sure that all of the required documents are attached and also that you're not adding extra documents. The reason for that is because we want, everyone needs to be able to tell the story of their project using the same tools or formatting. And so if you're adding extra documents, on some level, it might show that you weren't able to do that. So we really will only be looking at those things that we've required. And then the last thing is just proofreading and having someone else look at it for you as well. And now we can move on.
Okay, I'm gonna go into project development and just basic steps. And again, I know that all of you are all doing this, but the take-home message here is that it is critical to have a well-developed or a pretty well-developed project in order to write a good grant application, right? You can't have the idea of a project and then go write it and not know the scope of work or have been out on the ground, have engaged the community. So this is why we're hitting on this pretty hard today. Go ahead. So kind of just the steps, right? Project planning and scoping. Let's say you get that community or that landowner who gives Andy a call from TWC and say, hey, we heard there's money for fuels mitigation. So, right, then you got to go, okay, well, where do you live? How many people can we get engaged? We don't just really fund single homeowners. And having that conversation and that scoping of, is it strategic? Is that project area actually identified in a local CWPP or the county CWPP? And that matters, right? It used to be a checkbox. Yep. And I'm going to name that CWPP. And was that project really identified? Is that priority map actually in that CWPP? That's what the reviewers are looking for, right? We're not going to look up, but because it's local, SFMG is a local grant, we know, right? We know if that project is strategic. So scoping it, making sure that it's a strategic location, protecting communities and infrastructure and critical interests, protecting all of those, and that you actually have landowner interests that then blooms into community interest. And then again, researching funders and grants ahead of time. Understand cycles and timelines, the funding criteria, read their guidelines, right? Their guidelines might be different and you're like, oh, but that doesn't match what SFMG has. Maybe that's not the grant for me. Funding amounts, right? Is there a cap where how much you can apply for? What are the allowances and requirements of those grants? What grants can match what grants, right? Federal grants can't match federal grants. So you got to be careful on that and understand each one and what they require, right? And what is that match requirement? Is it a 1-to-1 match? Is it a 1-to-3 match? And does the grant allow for indirect costs? As you all know, the SFMG does not, we have not integrated indirect costs into our grant application. We considered it this winter, but decided if we did allow for indirect costs on a small $2 million budget, that would take away from contractual costs and other costs requested for. So we decided not to do that. So understand other grant funds. Is that a problem if our grant doesn't allow for indirect costs? And if so, how do you build some of that indirect cost into the personnel costs of our SFMG budget? So really being ahead of that ahead of time. And one thing I'm going to really hammer on, do the grants require versus encourage landowner match? To me, those are the same. We should be getting skin in the game at the beginning of that project idea. That conversation should be started at the beginning, not in the middle, not at the end of the project when you're about to apply, but at those beginning stages when you're doing that outreach and education, that informational meeting. You're really talking about those funding sources and really showing the landowners, hey, we're going to try to find $500,000 in grant funding for you. If you put this amount in, wow, between 10 landowners, that's 2% match. That's a heck of a deal, right? So learning how to communicate that message up front and showing, and I guarantee you, when you do that communication at the beginning, you show that example of what the percentage is of how much funding they're going to get to cover the grant project versus what we're asking what they can put in, that kind of brings a light bulb in their head and they're like, oh, that's a heck of a deal. Where do I sign up? So understanding that and really emphasizing that at the beginning. And as Vicki said, outreach and education, discussing funding, landowner match, landowner engagement, talking about the basic scope of work, the project steps, all the things you're already doing and that we know you're doing, but doing that early in the phase. So then as you go to start developing that grant application content, it's going to become a little bit easier for you. And then, of course, project development, field work, the data collection, the scoping of the work, right? And this is important because this is going to matter in down the road for what you perceive as what equipment do I need? Is this a tight-netted community with a lot of homes that need smaller equipment and or handwork? Or is this kind of the back 40 around a community that can take larger equipment that can move quicker, right? So be thinking of those things because that's going to matter in when you do that pre-application math to go, okay, I know this equipment's going to go quicker, so that cost per acre should be lower, right? So important to be thinking about all those things specifically for the application, right? So again, we'll say it over and over, pre-application math and drafting the grant proposal, right? Doing that not the day before, but maybe even a couple weeks before that you're starting to fill out those boxes in that Word document. And then when you get back to it, you're really just nailing it down and fine tuning it. And you're not doing a last minute thing, right? Not suggesting you do that, although I have seen that, right? And then just implementing, tracking, and monitoring and final reporting. A lot of words right there. Are there any questions on that? And if not, we'll dive in to the next slide. Okay.
Sorry, I'm going to jump in really
ahead.
quickly. Is there,
Yeah.
I know you used the 2% for the landowner in contribution as just the example. Is there
Yeah.
a desired percentage of landowner contribution you'd like to see?
Yeah, and Vicki will go into this in this budget section. There isn't a and we'll go into this what we want to see as a minimum. That, you know, again, any kind of landowner match, specifically hard match, is better than no match. And I know that all grants are going towards that way, right? If they're seeing. Now, you may have a community that just is underserved. We have a smaller match requirement for that, or you just know that the landowners can't put much up. Hey, we got 10 and they only each can put $250 in each. That's better than nothing, right? So, and then, you have communities that, hey, you don't want to, depict this, but that that they could probably put in a little extra, but you say, hey, if you all can put in $1,500 out of 15 of you, that's going to really shine and show that you're committed. So no, there is no stated requirement.
Okay.
Good question. So we're going to go into the budget, and I'm going to kind of go slow, and I have some examples of scopes of work, high scored, out of state, right? Way long ago when I used to be on the SFA grant committee. And I don't intend for you to read through them. I just want to kind of give you examples of kind of how some are written, how they're structured, and word count. But really kind of going through this because this is where we're seeing a lot of mistakes, and it's easy. I had to have Vicki review my slide, and I had a mistake in it. Oh my God, I had a number mistake. So it's so easy to make those mistakes. So let's keep on trucking. All right, do the math. How many times have you heard that? Right? I can't emphasize this process more than anything before, right? You may go, I don't know what the contractual costs are going to be. I have no idea. But if you are a forester and this is like your third or fourth application that you've put in, you should have some examples of your past projects, or you should have some partners that you could call on to, or you could call a couple of forestry contractors that you've developed a really good relationship and just say, hey, I'm just trying to get an idea, to get an estimate. I have 60 acres and steep slope, sight unseen. What would be an average cost per acre, right? Just a starting point, knowing that that's going to change so that on every application, we're not seeing the $6,000 cost per acre. And that is on every single application that we're getting right now. There's nothing wrong with that. And understand that you want to cover yourself. Get that more than anything. So that's why it's important to actually get a calculator out, use a pencil, use a piece of paper, I know, old school, and really calculate out costs. That's the personnel. You have one forester, right, that's going to work on this 60-acre project. I know that forester is going to be up there, guesstimate. If you say 2 days, well, let's add 3 just in case. What's it actually going to be? And base that on an average hourly cost that you're paying that forester, and pencil it out, right? So if we see a $30,000 for personnel, that's going to be a lot more realistic than, hey, this is a 60-acre project and they're asking for $100,000 in personnel. And they didn't really break it out. So we're going to know that that's not realistic, right? Unless it's really well justified in the narrative. Same thing for supplies, equipment, and travel. This is specific to SFMG. And then contractual costs, which I'll go in a little bit more on the next slide, is how do you figure that out when you haven't bid the project out? And then also knowing your match, right? Securing that landowner match, or knowing, hey, I'm applying for this other furworm grant or other grant, knowing that you may not get it, right? Or you will get it. But knowing that in advance, and for SFMG, we give you a 6-month grace period to secure grant funding. So even though you may not have secured it, we give you 6 months, right? I'm applying for furworm. I haven't heard yet. So we give you that 6 months. If you don't secure it, no harm, no foul. We just don't fund that project. So knowing that in advance.
All right, and I'll just go over this really quickly. I know most of you are probably already aware, but just to kind of remind you that the different, know the difference between cash match versus in-kind match. With cash match, that's just hard to say, being the hard match. These are direct project funds that cover actual project expenses, can come from other grants, cash contributions from landowners or partners. So that's the cash match, and then in-kind or soft match is the non-monetary contributions. So can get a little tricky. It typically includes non-monetary contributions like donated supplies, equipment, services, or labor. And the key for the application is valuing all of the contributions accurately when you are showing in-kind match. So an example would be donated equipment time valued at the current market rate for renting that piece of equipment, and then as well as the time of the person running the piece of equipment also would be valued at the appropriate volunteer or kind of staff average rate. So just keeping those things in mind. I do think in-kind can get a little murky, so always feel free when you're working on this to reach out with questions that you might have.
Hey, Vicky,
And I'll just,
oh yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say a quick question on in-kind. I think kind of answered it, but I have two landowners that have built like access trails all over their property that could help contractors get around. Would that potentially qualify as an in-kind match?
That's a murky one. That's a murky one. If those trails were built before the project, probably no. If the trails are being built specifically for the project, the landowners would have to track their time building that project and show it in a provided spreadsheet. So document that they're counting their hours, and then we give a voluntary rate. It's not that great, but it is a voluntary rate that they calculate, and then that can be made with that cash match, right? A combination.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Good question.
And then just a bit about the landowner match. We've talked about it a little bit, and landowner match does relate to cash match only. So when your landowners are doing like, volunteer projects or like what you just described, that can be in-kind match, but it's not that cash landowner match. And the way this works on the application, if you're not familiar, is that for landowner match, there's 1 to 10 points available. And we calculate a percentage of landowner match as part of the entire project cost. So for example, here, there's 2.4% match being provided by 4 different landowners. And we do use elementary school rounding. So that would be like 2 points on that question. So, and then the max anyone can receive is 10 points, even if they're putting in, like 50% match, landowner match, they still will they'll get the full 10 points, but not above that. Any questions about that? And these contributions can come from the landowners, including private individuals and HOA, family trusts, or etc. They can't be a cash match if it's from a governmental grant source. Any questions about the landowner match?
So just again to reiterate for Kat's question, right? If you can get those 10 points, that's 10 full points in that box, and you already get 5 points for other hard match such as government grants or other grants like that. So again, having some percentage of match is going to make that entire score go up a little bit more, and then Vicky will go into where you can make up some of those points. So we are being nice where the landowners can make up some of those points with that other soft or engagement activity.
Yeah. All right.
Awesome. So I did want to hit on contractual costs pre-budgeting because this is a challenge, right? But again, because you're all becoming seasoned foresters, as we know and as we speak, and lessons learned, right? And so every project you're going to learn, every project you're going to go, wow, I should have gotten a different piece of equipment on this one, or hey, I should have done this. And the take home message here is learn, you're going to learn like what type of equipment should be used, how slow does that equipment go, you know, a small piece of equipment, this cool tree shearer picture at the top, that's going to go slower, but that's going to be a lot more acceptable in a small community-wide fuels mitigation project, right? That's going to be lighter on the ground. You're going to have less chance of buggering up trees and hitting other residual trees. And it's just going to be a little bit easier for community folks, residents, to see that little machine. And often they want to go buy one after they see that tree shearer carrying that tree, right? So thinking about, okay, what type of equipment? Is it going to be a combination of mechanical and hand? Is it going to be a larger forwarder Timco in the back 40 that's going to, you know, probably treat 2 to 3 acres depending on terrain in a day, right? So knowing how fast and the appropriate type of equipment, that's going to affect the cost per acre, right? And so again, really keeping your past projects in your back pocket, talking to your partners, looking at market trends going across, and really actually kind of doing that math. Hey, I did a similar project and I had 25 acres done by hand and 100 acres done by mechanical, and this was the cost at the time. But we know fuel costs are outrageous right now. So I think my cost per acre is going to be higher, right? So kind of taking that base cost per acre from a past project and then bumping it up. And I know you can bump it up to 6,000, not a problem. It's just kind of a joke, a standing joke, because you know, we know that that's not true across the board, but really kind of perceiving what that estimated cost is. And it's also going to help you when you're doing that pre-budgeting to really consider the equipment that you need, right? It's actually going to also inform your scope of work and vice versa. So using these tools, using your partners, using market trends to kind of do that homework to get as close as you can. We know it's not going to be exact for that pre-budgeting contractual cost. Next. So this is just a very simple example of our SFMG budget. Again, I made a mistake on this. So the take-home point on this, in our grant application, most grant applications, they have it automatically add up for you. But I wouldn't depend on that, right? Still do the calculation. Make sure that you are adding up in the rows, the columns, you know, across, below, and in the final budgets, right? Make sure those numbers that you've done your pre-math with on your piece of paper add up, right? It is so easy to go, wait, did I do that right? You know, especially if it doesn't calculate, but even if it calculates, do that math, right? Make sure. Sometimes our applications have a glitch and that helps us. Same thing below in box E is you have to put that match in, make sure that you're putting that match in the correct boxes and that you're that it clearly adds up across, below, and in the final budget budget box. So again, doing that math, making it clear, and again, you know, I showed a little community chipping, and then from here, your budget narrative that should go, and we'll go into that now, should reflect what these boxes have in them.
Another quick question.
Yep.
If so, again, back to like a landowner doing work on their own property, that in-kind match is only going to count during the project implementation phase, not of anything they've previously done.
Correct.
Okay, got it.
Correct. Yep. Yep. It has to be. We can't, we can't retro work that had been done in the past.
To add on to that, so would someone who's using, say, their own heavy equipment, would they be reimbursed just at the rate of the rental, like the rental rate of that equipment?
Yeah.
Or would
Yes.
it be the rental rate plus the volunteer rate of their time doing the work?
Yeah, they can do both.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Vicky, yeah, you would submit an invoice of that rental cost, and then
Mhm.
the spreadsheet with the time for that person to operate that machine at the volunteer
Yeah.
rate.
Right.
And
And that
there's
would all
an
have to be done. Oh, go ahead, Vicky.
Oh, I was just going to say there is an in-kind form in the RFR packet where you can enter that information. And yeah, just them keeping track of their time is like evidence.
Great. And that all has to happen after the contract is signed or after the agreement is signed. Yeah.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. No work can take place until all funding agreements, and that's with all grants, until a project number or a funding agreement or something has been signed, work cannot commence until then. So yeah, good point, Emily. So I'm just going to reiterate what Vicky said above. Clear and concise budget narrative, consistent with line items in the budget boxes. The funding request justifies the proposed project activities, right? You don't have to be real wordy. You just have to say, this is what we're using this money for. And we don't need a lot of, flowery, words. We just really need to see that how that money is being used. And is it reasonable and necessary? And I'm going to hit home on the personnel costs. If you have a small project and you're asking for $100,000, going to know pretty quick that that's not, I'm going to want to see the math on that, right? And then clearly outlines how grant funds and required matching funds will be used. Not all grants in the budget narrative, not all, some grants just ask you to give a narrative just for the requesting amount, what you're requesting. In the SFMG grant, we ask you to show both the match and the requested. So I'm going to give you an example here. So this format, I want you to pay attention to the structure, right? Often when grant narratives are structured like this and broken out line item to line item, they score very well because they're clear, they're concise, they're easy to read, and the reviewer can go to the top because as reviewers, we have to check the math. And I can't reiterate how many times the narrative math in our past SFMG grants have not matched the SFMG budget boxes. And as Vicky said, that we have to go through, I've had to make calls, I've had to do the math on paper. And when anytime a selection committee has to go through that, points are going to come off pretty hard in this section because it doesn't make any sense, right? So take home point, make sure it's clear, make sure it's formatted. You don't have to do this exactly, but I'm going to tell you, if you do it this way, it's probably going to score because it's easier for you even to go line item by line item and explain those costs, right? So I always, for myself, I always like to put the total project budget up top. What are we breaking down here in this budget narrative? And so 674,000, that's the SFMG request and the match request, right? And that match request may be more. That's fine, but just showing that. Then start, and again, just what am I requesting for SFMG funding? and breaking down just from the start personnel, right? So this says for one forester, we're asking for $30,000 to do what? Right? And then calculated at the hourly rate. Some applicants put that hourly rate in and do the math. You don't necessarily have to do that unless you're asking for a lot. I'm going to say if you don't have that math in there, you're probably going to get a lower score, right? So be clear, concise of what that personnel costs are for. The $5,000 for grant administration to assist with budget tracking is kind of our little gift, not a gift, kind of our allowance for because we don't do indirect, right? So we know that there's other hands that may touch this project outside of the forester doing work. And so allow for that and calculate it right. Don't underestimate and don't overestimate. We're okay with that. But if we see, hey, we want $40,000 for grant administration, that's not going to sell, right? Because that's taking away. So supply costs, again, forestry supplies, paint, tree paint, flagging, paint guns, whatever, if you're paying for that kind of funding for this project, list what you're buying with that money at the market cost. Travel and vehicle, a lot of agencies or entities have a certain mile allowance, right? So do that round trip. And then, if you're like, well, I think it's going to be more days, well, then add, okay, I know we say this forester is going to be up here 2 days a week. Well, maybe they're going to be up there 4 days. So calculate that out and add that to make sure you're covering your costs, right? Contractual costs. Again, what I like to see, and a lot of grant reviewers like to see, is that total amount that's going to contractual costs. So you break it out. You add what you're requesting for SFMG. I just put Furworm in there, right? And then also the landowner match. You were able to secure $15,000 in landowner match. So you have a total of $630,000 going towards the contractual costs. And then you just break it out. Used for contracted time, blah, 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 right? For 125 acres at an estimated, right? So you've done the math, and then you put in a little caveat that this cost per acre may change. So again, calculate a little higher on your cost per acre, but get it as close as you can, knowing that will most likely change, right? This is the kind of information we're looking in that narrative. And then other match contributions. What is that in-kind doing? What are those folks doing? And how is that being calculated? So that's just an example of not even just SFMG, other grants, in-state, out-of-state. This kind of structure is where we have seen a high trend of high score narrative in the budget. Any questions? And we have examples in our budget note or our grant notebook. We're happy to send that out to y'all. Okay.
All right, now we're going to move into just kind of going box by box, and won't spend as much time on a few of these as others, but just want to give you some kind of key takeaways for each section of the application. So we'll start with the very first narrative question, which is related to your project goals and objectives. And, as with many proposals, this section, it's your opportunity to tell a compelling story about the impact your project will make. So you want to start with the big picture vision. That's your goals. And these will be broad and describe the desired outcome or the impact your project will have. like for reducing wildfire risk, protecting homes, or improving forest health. So those are your goals. And then you want to zoom in and outline your objectives. So these are the detailed, actionable steps of how you'll achieve your project goals. So again, the goals are the what are you doing, and the objectives are how are you doing it. And we've got some examples here of both of those. And yeah, you will likely have multiple objectives for each of your goals. And it does not have to be laid out like this, but just again, any way that you're representing your story or your information in a very clear and concise manner just makes it look like the project's very well developed and that you understand how to present it for an audience where not everyone on the review panel will have familiarity with your project. So just keeping that real tight.
Okay, so project area description, right? Challenges and current conditions. And I'm going to go through this quickly, but these are the things that we're looking for. And this is stated in our guidelines too. This is specific to SFMG, but also, probably pretty close to other grants too, right? These are the attributes and the topics that we're looking for to be addressed in the box. And make sure that you show what the challenges are, right? You're addressing, and do that clearly and concisely, right? There's a high fire danger. There's been no past management. They have a big mountain pine beetle outbreak, and we have lots of seasonal residents, right? Really showing or describing what this project area is, and it also exhibits the need. So the scope of work narratives use metrics. I'm not going to go through these. Again, sometime in a lot of our scopes of work in past, you just go on with, and this is not bad, but this is not a thesis, right? So a lot of ecological terms or keywords, those are great, but sometimes uses up too much space. So really talk about the specifics using metrics. Go ahead. So I don't expect you guys to read these. The point is looking at the structure and how this narrative is structured. And I just want to kind of reiterate doing this in a separate document and understanding the character count, right? Because sometimes, a lot of times we go, well, it's a small box and we don't know how to explain it. Using metrics helps you consolidate what you're trying to explain, and you can get the scope of work explained pretty clearly and concisely if you just stick to the specifics of that scope of work, right? So this is just an example, very high scored. This received, there were 30 reviewers on this grant applicant, and it scored 9 out of 10 on all 30. That's pretty unreal to have that kind of consistency. So it's clear, it's concise, it provided metrics. Next. Another scope of work, again, differently structured, but used a lot of metrics, scored high, right? These are all high scored ones. It wasn't structured like the one before, but it gave a lot of detail and went well under the character mark, but it got its story across of what exactly was going to happen with this money. Next. Here's a very beefy one, right? The grant applicant, this is an old SFA grant, and they allowed 3,800 characters, right? This one came close to it, so gave a lot of detail, but it was still, the way you read it, it was just clear and concise exactly what that money was going to, the what, the who, and the how. And a lot of metrics used in there, and again scored as well. And you can see in here this had an outreach component too, so they explain, hey, with some of this money we're going to do some outreach on here. So from top to bottom it gave a really good, clear, concise depiction of the scope of work. And you guys will get copies of this PowerPoint, but I just wanted to go through that quickly of kind of why these scored so high. Next. So I think this is me. Yep. So the strategic value of the project, well, our grant is the Strategic Fuels Mitigation Grant Program. And strategic is becoming kind of that key word across all grants, right? Because grant funding has become so competitive. Gone are the days that just because we got this 300-acre, one landowner, 300-acre project out in the middle of nowhere, just because he really wants to treat doesn't mean it's the best treatment, right? Just because he's like, hey, I want to treat my 300 acres, you have to look, where is this being a catch or mitt? Is this effective? Is this identified where it's going to protect a community? Right. And I know a lot of you were at Jack Cohen's at the conference, and Jack Cohen saying, oh, only do home hardening. So now, even as foresters, we have to even be more strategic in how that outside of that community fuels mitigation is going to protect a community. So using tools, making sure it's protecting communities, critical infrastructure. We're all going to be looking for that. We're all going to be looking at the maps when we review your grant applications and really ensuring that it is strategic and is it tying into past, future, or past projects, right? So anyways, really key box there.
Okay, then the next box on the application is related to partner contributions. And really the key point we want to make here is that while we do want to see you list all of your cooperators, partners, and contributors to the project, what's really important is detailing what's being contributed. So is this a partner playing a mentoring role, a consultation, staffing, are they donating equipment, or matching funds? So just remember on this box to make sure you're not just saying who you're partnering with, but what they're contributing. And then this kind of goes back to the landowner match box and that conversation. So we have another question on the application specific to landowner engagement and contributions beyond the monetary contributions. So, this is important for all projects, but particularly so if the community isn't in a position, like Meg referred to earlier, that they can contribute a lot financially. So it's an opportunity to, get back some of those points that they may not have gotten based on the percentage of match. This reflects the buy-in and support for the project. So you want to talk about the ways the landowners are committed to the project and engaged in mitigation sort of on their own, in their own right. So are they participating in any of the programs like Wildfire Partners programs, whether that's home assessments, the community chipping program, rebate programs? Are they part of the Forest Ag Tax Program? Or is this a FireWise community or a community working toward that FireWise designation? So any activities or projects that they're doing that demonstrate their commitment, we would love to see described in this section. Yeah, Emily.
So I'm curious if landowners like in a community who are neighborhood champions, if they spend time on the phone, reaching out to neighbors, holding meetings, kind of maybe even informally, is that something that is eligible here?
For engagement or for like in-kind match?
It can be both. I mean, so yeah,
if her.
Oh, if you have a, did we lose everybody? No, I think I see some heads moving.
Yeah,
Well,
but Emily's present.
Yeah. Well, we'll try to, yeah. This could be if there's actual volunteer hours where a neighborhood ambassador or a liaison is spending hours on like a community webpage or flyers or mailings. They should be tracking those hours because that can be in-kind outreach match. but it also should be depicted here too, depicted here of how that community is engaged. This just gives you an opportunity to show us above and beyond, this community is really into this project, and they're committed to seeing this during and going forward, right? So, and again, and I know you all know this, that I harp on this, and again, it goes back to not only should we be doing fuels mitigation, but we should also be working from the home out. So this, if you've got a project like, hey, phase one, we're going to get 10 of these homeowners to do individual home assessments. So they start to think about home hardening a defensible space. So then that ties into the fuels reduction around them. We need to see that. This gives an opportunity to depict that in there. So good question, Emily.
And did we, I know you were off for a minute. Did you get an answer to your question?
Yeah, I did cut out there for a minute. The last I saw was Meg giving thumbs up. And I can check in with Patrick to get
okay.
the more detailed answer.
Okay.
Thank you
Well,
very
and the
much.
short answer is that the example you gave can be used both for if they're doing it and they're tracking their time, that can be in-kind match, but you would also want to talk about that here because it's a community member who's really engaged and supportive of the project.
And leading. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good question. Excellent.
All right. And then the timeline narrative. And this is just an example. Again, you don't have to lay it out like this, but this is a really good way to think about it because your timeline is, think of it as your project roadmap. So you want to lay out the key phases such as planning, contracting, implementation, and monitoring. And then you want to follow each milestone with some specific targets describing how progress will be measured. And then some of those things that are measurable could be like outreach events, meetings, and then of course, how many acres do you want to complete, given each phase of the project. And with it being a 3-year grant, it makes sense to line it out, year by year. But this is really just an example. As long as you are showing your milestones and those real specific targets over time.
And I just want to reiterate on this, this does get scored. So being brief in it doesn't do you any good, like just putting a year down. And this is a real good example of the detail that we like to see to show that it actually does have a timeline to it. So, and including that reporting element.
Right. And we do understand, like, along with the scope of work, that this could change as the project gets going, but it just gives us a way of seeing that you've put a lot of thought into it. And it's also that, like, your timeline matches with your scope of work, matches with your budget narrative, and that these all kind of tell the same story.
Okay, last box, or one of the last boxes, is project sustainability. And the format that I have here, again, you don't have to do this, but to me, you get points taken off if you're not covering all elements asked to be covered. So for me, as a grant writer, I'm going to list them out so I ensure that I'm covering them clearly and concisely. Okay to do it in paragraph form, but I find listing them out and just giving, hey, this is a lodgepole pine return interval, so we expect to get back in here in 3 years to do a second entry, right? Environmental factors, the return interval of the vegetation, the soils, again, forest structure, maybe there's other environmental factors. There is a mountain pine beetle, right? So addressing those, but clearly and concise. And then go to the next project, sustainability. Is the community going to continue the efforts, right? Are they going to do continued trainings, events, mailings, flyers? Are they going to try to become a Firewise community? address that so that we show that this is not a one and done project. Well, we're done and bye-bye. We got the funding. Well, that felt good. And then we never go back to that community. We want to see that they've got momentum going forward. And then the commitment, right? And again, reiterating the box above with landowner engagement, how engaged is that community for long-term management? Right? Are they going to be monitoring? Are there agreements in place with the forester or the entity that they're working with? Are they going to work with the local fire protection district on evacuation, right? Or those kind of things should be listed in there. And then monitoring, right? Are you going to keep an eye on that mitigation? Maybe you're going to get some blowdown. That's not unheard of in Boulder County, right? So addressing each one of these elements. And again, this is how I recommend you listing it or structuring it in the grant application to ensure you're addressing them all. And you might go, well, I don't even know how, they kind of seem the same. Just make sure you address it because you get points off of elements you don't address. And if it just gets real wordy, really just be clear and concise and depict how this project is going to be sustained over a long time. Any questions on that box? Okay.
All right, and then the last one that we'll speak to, the last one on the application is related to socially vulnerable communities. And just for a point of reference, there's also a question on the very first page of the application asking if you are applying on behalf of a socially vulnerable community. And if you check yes on that box, then you complete this question at the end of the application. And this is actually worth 5 additional points. So socially vulnerable communities can earn 5 additional points that other communities cannot. Just for a point of reference, we have not had any project applications come in that encompass a socially vulnerable community. And we do have a pretty specific way of looking at that. And so for the SFMG program, a socially vulnerable community is defined as an entire community, HOA, or large group of property owners in the same geographical area who are seeking to implement fuels mitigation or a planning project. So, and it does have to be identified as socially vulnerable using the CSFS Forest Atlas Social Vulnerability Index or the CDC's SVI map. So it is a very specific designation. And if that does match or fit with the community you're applying on behalf of, that also means that the match is reduced. So there's a 25% match as opposed to a 50% match. And then when you answer the question in the box, you want a very clear description of the community, including data, statistics that demonstrate the social vulnerability. So you may have that where it's showing it on the SVI index, but then you need to speak to it a little bit more pointedly. And you also want to describe the expected benefits of the project to the community. And as we said, we have seen a few applications come in where they are not applying as a designated socially vulnerable community, so they're not looking for that reduced match. But you may be in a community where there are some real social vulnerabilities and you do have that on the ground knowledge or local knowledge. You can answer this question. You will not get points from this box, but it may just do a better job of telling the whole story of your project. And so as part of the application, it could still be something worthwhile to answer, but if it's not, if it doesn't meet that criteria, you wouldn't get the points or the match reduction. Any questions about that?
And I will also say, you have local knowledge, like Vicki said, so it could be a case by case, and you just have to reach out, and obviously a site visit, right? Is required anyway. So this is like, we got 30 people in here who just don't have any kind of funding. And can we lower that required match? It's also a case by case. All right. We are done. Andy.
So if we're planning a project in a community where it encompasses an HOA within there that is socially vulnerable, but the entire project area goes beyond that, we may not be able to get the extra points for that, but it's still worth describing that, it sounds like, and then having a discussion about that.
Yeah, and you
Correct.
could even describe that in the project area description box, right? That not all, but we have an elderly, let's say we have an elderly population or lower income population. You don't get points off that box. It's just automatically, it doesn't go against your points if you don't fill that box in. And and so you could use that project area description to add those details.
Yeah, that's a great point. Any other questions?
So we do have a grant notebook that we put together a year ago. We're happy to send that out. It's I believe it's electronic. So folks who don't have it, it gives some resources, some tools, our past PowerPoint and some grant application examples, some high scored ones, some low scored ones. Encourage you to use those to make it easier for y'all. You know that you're busy out in the field, and so grant writing is it's just this other added thing. So use all the tools. We want you to be successful, and this will be posted, right? Vicki?
Yeah, it will. We'll
Yeah.
post it. We'll get it up on the website. May take us a few days for that to happen, but we will send out the slide deck. And I will also, I note here on this last slide, we were going to put in the spring 2026 timeline. We'll do it after, but just to say it to you out loud, the application deadline is June 4th. That's a Thursday. And then we anticipate notification being kind of based on the BOCC meetings and with that holiday, 4th of July holiday in there. But by the middle of July, we would be letting people know whether or not their proposal was funded. And then what would be the other key date? Then you would have 3 years for a mitigation program, would be the project date starting from when you receive your notification, and 2 years for planning projects. So I think those are the key dates, and I will put that box on here. Yeah, Emily.
So, something that I had asked earlier about is that no work can begin, like we can't be reimbursed for anything until an agreement is signed.
Correct.
But the deadline begins once the day we are notified. So those are separate.
So-
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, but once you sign your grant funding agreement, boots can hit the ground. But until that legal document is in place, no work can start, right? So once that's signed, off to the races. And
the
that's with
other-
all grants.
Yeah, and the other thing, Meg talked about the 6-month kind of grace period to secure match funding, and that clock begins when you get that kind of pre-award notification. So if those notifications go out, say July 15th, you have 6 months from July 15th to find match.
And then once you do find that match, then a grant funding agreement will go into place. So one won't get started. And if you're like, we don't have the match yet, we give you 6 months. And then if by that 6 months, like Vicki said, if you don't have it, then we cancel the funding unless you're like, I've got, and then you can reapply. And then if you have it, Vicki will implement the grant funding agreement. That doesn't take too long, and then you get boots. So you can't start a project with half the funding anyways for reimbursement purposes. So I know that was a lot. Thank you guys for taking your time out on this beautiful day. Know it was a lot. And if you have any questions aside, you think of something, just email Vicki and I. We're here to help. We're here to help you be successful, and appreciate you all.